Another one of the questions that we wanted to ask you, still related to design, of course, we wanted to ask you more of a subject which is dear to Stefano because it's about Italian design. So um, we've mentioned an exposition which took place in 1972, which was probably, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, which was probably one of the most important exhibitions that took place in order to promote Italian design internationally on international level, which was called the New Domestic Landscape, curated by Emilio Amba. And why was this exhibition so important? And how is Italian design seen today? And how did the characters and how did it change, or is it still the same? So what's the feeling on this?
So I think I will say that I am not the sort of like best person to talk about why this exhibition was so important. Sadly, I wasn't like what actually funny thing about this exhibition is that like it has left such a lasting legacy, and at the same time it was open for a very short time at the museum, and not a lot of people actually had the chance to see it. But I think one of the reasons why it was so surprising for people in the US to see this show was because I think the sort of like the design attitude at the time in the US was very much informed by the Bauhaus, for example, that looked at materials and at sort of like different design approaches in a very different way, in a way that was much more understated, that very much looked at sort of like, minimal materials and minimal design concepts. Whereas once they saw sort of like this just breath of fresh air through the sort of like particularly the sensuous materials that a lot of these Italian designers were using, people were truly shocked, and it really opened a different door for people. And I also think that one important sort of like lasting legacy that, and obviously you both know more about this than I do, being Italian, or at least Stefano being Italian. I don't know if you're Spanish or Italian.
No, I'm Italian, but I live in.
Okay. Anyway, is that I think for Italian designers, there is very much an emphasis in sort of like understanding design as sort of like the design process as part of a system. So you're not only looking at sort of like the aesthetics, you're also looking at the materials, you're also looking at the relationship with the manufacturer. And that is something that is not only very lasting, I think it's also something that we still look at when we think about design. For example, at the museum, of course, the priorities now have changed. What we think of as a sort of like an innovative material now is fully different. At the time, the exhibition in 1972 showed all these beautiful plastic objects that were seen as so groundbreaking, and obviously now we have a different attitude towards plastic. But still, we understand that like the way in which a designer thinks about its materials and it thinks about the manufacturing process is still really, really important. One example that I would give, because I think, or sort of like the example of a designer or a design duo that very much elucidate this, in my opinion, is Forma Fantasma. We're obviously big fans of their work here. At the moment, we only have acquired their work, Botanica. And Botanica, similar to sort of like what Neri Oxman is doing, but in my opinion, in a very Italian way, looked at biopolymers as a sort of like an alternative for our sort of like oil-dependent society. Sort of like how can we understand materials in a different way and look for alternative materials? But they do it in a way that emphasizes craft in such a way that to me is very Italian. But not only that, similar to what the exhibition, the New Domestic Landscape exhibition was doing, it looks at design as a system. So, whereas like in the exhibition, designers were thinking about their objects within an environment, a set environment, for example, a living room or whatever. Here, Forma Fantasma are looking at their designs as part of a larger planetary system, that requires redesigning, right? So it requires looking at new alternative materials. It requires looking at alternative production methods, and I think that's where I kind of like see that connection. And again, even though we're not sort of like still looking at plastic and all these like materials that at the time were seen so innovative, we're still thinking about design in a similar way. And so the exhibition did sort of like leave us with a very strong legacy.
Thank you.